Thank you all very much for your cooperation. Can I ask that we take our seats, please? Thank you very much. I believe that the other sessions are about to start, so for those of you who'd like to move to the other technical breakout sessions, please do so now. For this session, I'd like to invite first to come up and really set the theme before we move to the panel. We have the governor of the Banco Central de Timor-Leste. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for Abrao de Vasconcelos.
Good afternoon. I have been asked to do an intervention of 5 minutes, so I'll try my best um, um, to deliver in 5 minutes. What I will like to do is that I will highlight a few points on the DFS development and then share some of our experience on how we started the DFS journey and then pose a couple of questions for us to discuss. But before continue with my intervention, I would like to use this opportunity to thank Central Bank of Jordan for hosting us here and for the very warm and gracious welcome extended to us. I also would like to congratulate the AFI Management Unit for the excellent organization of the AGM and GPF as usual. Um, so, over the past 10 years, we have witnessed a significant transformation in the financial sector, particularly the way financial services are delivered, the deployment of new technology, invention of new platforms or systems, the introduction of various innovative products, etc. This transformation has forced many central banks and supervisory authorities to adapt to these changes. Some of us were able to deal with the change quickly, while others were not. This include Banco Central Timor-Leste. We started our DFS journey back in 2013. At that time, we conducted a review into our financial sector and came up with the conclusion that the central bank has to take over the development of our national payment system. For your information, Timor-Leste financial sector composed mainly banks and insurance company. We have smaller MFIs and MTOs. But the main, the principal sector is the banking sector. And all of the bank are branches of foreign bank except one state-owned bank and two MFIs. Long story short, in less than 5 years, we were able to introduce three critical payment systems. The wholesale payment system, RTGS, the automated clearinghouse, and a national card and mobile switch. We were able to achieve this, and also we were able to integrate the entire system, commercial banks and the fintech companies that we introduced um, late in 2018. So we thought that the journey is getting close to end. In fact, this is far from truth. As all of us we are witnessing, yesterday we just agreed to update the social accord. And this is something that if we note, we now start having other issues getting into the um, the plate. CBDC is one of the issues. So this is something that for all central banks, particularly those that central banks that and supervisory authorities that we have limited resources, AFI provide an excellent platform for us to exchange and learn, exchange experience and learn from each other. To conclude, those innovation in systems and product, deployments of new technology can only become meaningful to those in the bottom of the pyramid if supported by key infrastructure, as highlighted in documents published by AFI. Just to mention a few here, interoperability of platforms, development of agent network, consumer empowerment and protection, supportive KYC regime, etc. I'd like to share with you two of these key infrastructure, interoperability of platforms. In 2021, we completed we integrate the all banks in Timor-Leste and also the fintech companies. So now people can move their money from bank account to wallet account, vice versa. This give tremendous benefits to those particularly in the rural areas and those that receive regular payments from the government like elderly, the support for mothers. They have been benefit with this development. Second that I would like to share a little bit is that the agent network. In 2019, we introduced a program we call Digital Village. This is to expose population in the rural areas into the digital financial product. And one thing that time we learned from our experience is that we did not put attention on the agent network. So we focus more on how to promote, how to encourage fintech companies and banks to expand their network in the rural areas. Then after 1 year, we learned that this is something that we have to change. And last year, Central Bank will lead the process of do a national-wide promotion of getting agent everywhere. By the way, the agent that I'm referring to here, the agent of fintech companies, because they are the one who easily deploy their agent in the rural areas. Just to share a little bit, those population teachers particularly that work in the remote areas, they don't need to travel to the capital of municipals to get their salary. They move their money from their bank account to their wallet account and then walk to agent next door and get their money. And this almost reach to the entire territory of Timor-Leste. So DFS will contribute significantly to healthcare access if, as I mentioned a few points before, if supported by those key infrastructure. Before I conclude, I would like to pose two questions for the panelists to discuss. And probably will not get the answer now, but this is something that I believe will be very important for us to look in the future. First is that, is there a regulatory space for payment service provider to offer comprehensive basic financial services, such as saving, health-related insurance payments, etc.? Second, how digital financial service specifically central bank digital currency could help advancing the healthcare need. With that, I conclude my intervention. Thank you. It's just 8 minutes.
Please, can we thank Governor Vasconcelos again, ladies and gentlemen, for setting our theme. I'd like to now invite the moderator for the session, Ms. Candy Ngula, the Deputy Director, Bank of Namibia, where she's involved in conducting research on trending and complex topics affecting the digital payments ecosystem and producing regulatory tools that have direct impact on the development of digital financial services ecosystem in Namibia. Candy also is the newly elected chair of AFI's Digital Financial Services Working Group. So please join me in giving a round of applause for Candy. The floor is yours, Candy. Please come forward. Let's welcome her, and she, in turn, will welcome our panel members.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, fellow regulators and fellow policymakers, associates and colleagues. I'd first like to thank the AFI Management Unit for entrusting myself as well as the speakers today to tackle this very important topic. So we're very humbled and honored to be sharing our insights as well as our knowledge when it comes to digital financial services in the context of healthcare access. So thank you very much for joining us for this discussion. The way we'll run this session is we've just had a theme setting from the governor. And what we do now is we'll have an overview presentation from one of the speakers. And this presentation will outline key findings and trends and analysis outcomes based on a report that AFI as well as Access Health International worked on over the past couple of years. So one of our speakers will conduct that presentation and just give us an overview of that study. We will then get into the panel discussion. We have amazing speakers, and from their profiles, as I'll read to you shortly, you'll see that we have a very good blend of knowledge and skills from individuals cutting across public and private sector that will highlight in a very pragmatic way, hopefully, how regulation, financial inclusion, technology interlinkages with healthcare. We will also provide you with the opportunity to ask questions. I know this is the graveyard shift and everybody must be tired, but I'd like to ask for your participation when the time comes so that we can engage the speakers through a Q&A. And lastly, we will also allow you to do an evaluation of the session as well. So when the time comes, please do partake in the survey. We'd greatly appreciate your feedback. So to start off, I'd like to call each speaker to the stage, and you can walk onto the stage as I read your name. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Adrian Medenhall, who's the Global Business Development Lead for Access Health International. So, yeah. Thank you. So Access Health International is a non-profit think tank, advisory group and knowledge and implementation partner to governments and the private sector, and it's dedicated to improving access to high quality, affordable healthcare across all income levels and in low, middle, and high income countries. It advises national and regional governments and the private sector on the design and management of healthcare finance and delivery systems. Speaking to Adrian yesterday, just from the conversation, I could tell that she's deeply, deeply passionate about health and making sure that healthcare should really be a right, a civil right to everybody. So we have the right person for this job today. The next individual is the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Sierra Leone. That's Sheikh Yaya Sase. So if I can just ask you, one of the things we've learned in Toastmasters, and I always say this, we clap until they reach their destination, so. Thank you. Wonderful. So just a little insight into his experience. He has tremendous experience in the financial sector management and is also an accomplished professional in the banking sector. Sheikh Yaya Sase, as the Deputy Governor, is also responsible for and oversees financial inclusion, financial integrity, and financial stability. He's also played a very pivotal role and has been the driving force behind the development of Sierra Leone's national financial inclusion strategy for 2022 to 2026. He is a loving husband and a dedicated father to 4 children. That's what I found in your profile. So it makes sense as to why you would also take this topic very, very seriously, because we all have loved ones and health is important to them. Sharif Lokman, Sub-Governor of Financial Inclusion and Sustainability of the Central Bank of Egypt. Mr. Sharif Lokman is responsible for financial inclusion for individuals as well as MSMEs, in addition to sustainable development and financial literacy. While he is the sub-governor of the central bank, he's also a very seasoned banker with extensive experience in the banking sector, spanning over 26 years, during which he held a number of leading positions, setting valuable imprints of the banking sector through his accomplishments cutting across sales, retail, branch management, and so forth. So a very good speaker to have on the team today as well. And last but not least, we have Wangechi Kanjama. Wangechi is the CFO of M-Pesa Africa, Safaricom and Vodacom Group. Her career spans over many years in the disciplines of business planning and forecasting, wholesale and roaming, business partnerships and performance management. From her profile and what I've picked up from what people said about her on LinkedIn, she's known to challenge convention and she tries to do things in a different way whenever there's a new tide. She's also known to have unimpeachable approach to resolving issues, which is something that we can certainly look forward to in this discussion today as well as we unpack this crucial topic. So ladies and gentlemen, these are our speakers for this panel on DFS, on healthcare access. And just to get us into it, in 2018, the World Bank and the World Health Organization estimated that healthcare expenses pushes nearly 100 million people into poverty every single year. For most of the world, financial access strongly determines healthcare access. The link between financial health and physical health is a key driver behind the worldwide commitment to universal health coverage, UCI. And the central aim of UHC is to ensure that all people have access to healthcare services when and where they need it the most. Financial inclusion, therefore, really does have a complementary role to reinforcing UHC goals. And we've also seen how AFI member countries have showcased in various ways how DFS can be leveraged in healthcare access through different use cases pertaining to mobile money, banking, credit, and so forth. So before we get into the discussion, I'd like to ask Adrian, who will then do a very, very short presentation around the study that they did with AFI, and just to outline some of the key outcomes from that study. Adrian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and I will try to be brief. As mentioned, I know this is the last session of the day, so thank you all for being here. As mentioned, Access Health conducted a study with AFI last year on looking at a global landscape of what are the DFS for health models that we're seeing around the world in 5 particular regions: Latin America, Africa, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. So we conducted this mapping exercise to see what are the models that are out there, what can we learn from these models, and what are the role of regulators in enabling these models to exist and thrive. So as Candy mentioned, universal health coverage. In 2019, heads of state from around the world recommitted to UHC, and particularly the goal to achieve UHC by 2030. That goal was very ambitious in 2019 and is even more so now with COVID, as COVID has set back many countries on their UHC trajectories. And so we're now at a point where even fewer people have access to essential health services, and particularly the ability to pay for and access the care that they need when they need it. Unfortunately, we've lost a number of healthcare workers during COVID-19 as well. So when we talk about the application of digital financial services, or even broader than that, a financial inclusion approach to healthcare, we are not looking at only how do we pay for it, but we also have to take that step back and look at how do we support healthcare systems through these innovative approaches. So here's the 3 questions that we were trying to answer through the report. Again, what are the models that are out there and how are they impacting both access to health and financial access? What are the regulatory environment, and what are the actions that regulators can take in order to remove some of these barriers and to play an active role in creating these models as well? So the models that we're looking at specifically within this report, and I have to mention as mentioned, that broader ecosystem around DFS for health is maybe even broader than these, but the 5 that we looked at were specifically credit and lending. When we talk about credit and lending for healthcare, we're really talking about how do we create ethical lending options for people, as we know that many people, when they have that unexpected health event that costs a lot of money, they might sell income generating assets, they might borrow from family and friends, they might go to loan sharks, or they might go to an established lender that's going to charge a really high interest rate. And we don't want people going into unbearable amounts of debt in order to pay for necessary health care. Payments, of course, which underlies all of these models, but we see that even in and of itself, that just digital payments were able to help people pay for telehealth services, buy products, healthcare products, get medicines during COVID, but also act as almost that foundational layer to the more innovative DFS for health models. Savings as well, having digital health savings accounts or digital wallets enables people not only to put aside money for anticipated healthcare costs or to pay recurring healthcare costs, it also acts as an aggregator for funds that are coming in from different sources. So whether that is the insurer, donor funding, the out-of-pocket payments, remittances as well. While remittances are a separate category, they do have, they can be combined in that health wallet. So from the patient perspective, they're making one payment despite the fact that the funds are coming in from multiple places. And then of course, InsurTech as well. So an InsurTech runs the gamut from the platforms that allow people to shop for and purchase insurance all the way through to claims and reimbursement. So we found in our study that InsurTech was the largest, we found the most InsurTech models out there, followed by the e-payments, of course, and then the crowdfunding as well, and lastly, savings. I'm just gonna go through these quickly. What we do know is that during a crisis, whether this is a natural disaster or a pandemic or other crises as well, if DFS has a positive impact on people's health and allows us it's one of the tools that are helpful in getting people the healthcare services and products they need immediately, rather than waiting for different programs to roll out or to move cash to where it needs to be. So what are the role of regulators? This intersection between DFS and healthcare is really early on. We're at a point of we don't have established best practices. We have emerging best practices. We have promising practices. We have things that look good. And what we really want to find out, we're in this opportunity zone right now of being able to learn from the other models that exist. So the government can play that active role of facilitating that knowledge sharing and awareness between different partners and with communities and with patients directly as well. And then second, they can create these innovation hubs. So whether that is a sandbox or innovation challenges, et cetera, is that they can actively work with the private sector and be that steward for innovation and put those parameters around the fact and essentially have that call to action of saying, we want private sector innovation in this particular area. And there is an opportunity to partner with governments, to partner with UHC programs for those models that are successful. And then third is actively co-creating these models. So the government has an opportunity to say, we want to co-create with the private sector. These are the types of models that we think either complement or are needed within our national insurance agendas. And we want to invest in, co-create them, and roll them out as well. So this is where I'm going to conclude. I hope I was done within the 5 minutes. And I look forward to the discussion ahead.
Thank you very much for that very concise presentation, Adrian. Very useful insights indeed, and it's good to see the work that Adrian and the team are doing to advance healthcare access. So I will ask all the panel members a single question to get us into the discussion. And to each and every one of you, I'll ask a specific question and you can answer from your vantage point. We have this question was sort of touched on by Adrian in her presentation, but we do have the policymakers that will touch on it from a specific vantage point, and we have the private sector company who will also touch on it from a specific vantage point. So the question is, between central banks and innovators, how can the two advance safe and secure, digitally enabled health financing from your perspective? And we can start with Wangenji.
Thank you. So we have a very real example, and I'll use Kenya because within the Kenyan framework, what we have is a very strong partner ecosystem that allows for what we call health wallets. So we have a product, it's very prevalent and very known, it's called Mtiba, and what it simply means, it's a Kiswahili word that means to treat. So what that wallet actually has done is it's off a healthcare platform. We are one of the providers. You just need a SIM card from a mobile telecom operator, and then you get the wallet. The wallet is very, very specific and very, very targeted in the sense that it just allows you to save for healthcare needs. We have roughly 500,000 registered users, and we've disbursed over time roughly $1 million US worth of medical payouts. So we do have on the ground a very real working model, and what I'd really like to emphasize is that in the area of health, no one can have a monopoly. So it's a strong partnership between a very large number of private sector players. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And in Kenya, what was the role of the central bank in enabling this product to thrive as it has?
So I'll be honest, typically the central bank needs to be notified and they make an approval, but given that it doesn't necessarily fall strictly within their approval ambit, they will take note that that product is being offered. But then because it doesn't necessarily need for you to be licensed, but at least you need to be working with the Ministry of Health for them to have a view and appreciate. So they come in mainly as a stakeholder that is aware that we are creating a very enabling environment from a health perspective. So they would just be aware and we would interact with them, but they don't necessarily approve in this particular case within Kenya.
Okay. I will then ask Governor of Egypt, Sub-Governor, what your thoughts are on how central banks can work with innovators to advance safe and secure, digitally enabled health financing, from your perspective.
Let's first thank you for the invitation, and I want to welcome and thank all my panel members and for the fruitful discussion of yesterday. There is a very important point I want to make first, the correlation between the health system and the financial inclusion. Because for some people, I found that during the last 2 days, where is the relation? From my point of view, if we go for all the excluded people from the financial system, we will find them, most of them, they are the underserved from the health system. And from here, it's coming the relation between financial inclusion and the health, and how financial inclusion can impact the health system. Regulator, if we are always trying to find solution for financial inclusion and to include people in the rural area and the underserved, parallelly, you will find yourself that you are finding solution for the provide these segments or these people with the required health service. Regulator should, and this is what happened in Egypt during the last period, we started to correlate with the health institutions like the National Insurance Health Association, which is just started 2 years ago. It started in 2 governorate, and they are expanding by 2030 should cover the whole country. The tool is of covering or correlation is to have a multiple application card, which can be used as a financial inclusion or as an account, and at the same time is tracking and covering the health insurance services, tracking your health history. On the same time, you can claim and refund over the card. This project is one of the main projects in this area. Otherwise, I think fintech is very, very, very important during the next period if we want to include, on terms of inclusion and on the same time included on the health area. And in Egypt, and the regulator or the Central Bank of Egypt, they're supporting a different entrepreneurship and fintech company in this area for providing the health service on terms of medicines and on the same time in terms of hospital, and on the same time tracking your medical situation and medical status historical. This is very important. It started to expand in Egypt during the last 2 years dramatically. We have more than 10 companies in the process in this area. There is another topic, I think I will take it in another way, of how to finance to get the maximum benefit from banking or regulator on the same time in the health area. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. And Sheikh Yahya, I'd like to get your perspective on how central banks can work with innovators in this space.
Thank you very much, Moderator. Of course, I mean, we all know the importance of the regulator when it comes to supporting, I mean, the private sector for introduce, I mean, innovative ideas in a number of sectors, including the health sector. For us in Sierra Leone, currently, I mean, government is making efforts to introduce the insurance health cover for Sierra Leoneans. But the project itself is in its infancy, I mean, stage. We had an experience in 2014 where Ebola started, and at the time there were no structures, I mean, to be able to respond to the crisis immediately. And as a central bank, we had discussions with the Ministry of Health to see how we can best support, particularly, I mean, the responders to the crisis itself, the health workers. And we are able to do that in a way that kind of, I mean, minimize the fatality. And so we are continuing to engage with the relevant institutions within the country. We had various, I mean, innovative companies that had approached the bank, I mean, to introduce different services, I mean, including health service services. But the issue is that for some of the services that we have been approached, we don't have regulations at the moment. And so what we do currently is to allow some of these to enter into the sandbox. And we monitor their performance, and at some point, we'll then allow them to go out to the public.
Right. Thank you very much. So I will pick up from where you left off with regards to 2014, 2015, and the Ebola epidemic in Sierra Leone. And I think there were a lot of interventions that the central bank had to undertake because there would have been major consequences. And from what I understand, KYC requirements, for instance, were lowered, and some of the regulations were made a bit lighter so that payments could be made faster and workers were able to get their payments, and even the frontline workers were able to receive their salaries and so forth and so forth. And this also helped to prevent strikes, because if people don't get paid, you have consequences around that. So you also mentioned that you played quite a driving force in your profile when it comes to the modernization and the establishment and modernization of the national payment system, financial inclusion. So given that period with Ebola epidemic and building a payment system and responding to that crisis in the context of digital financial services, what are the key takeaways that you can share with us today?
Yeah, thank you very much. Like you said, we had the experience of Ebola in 2014, 2015. And when the crisis started, for the health workers and also the people who were affected, initially, payment to those health workers was done through the cash system. And over 20,000 individuals were paid at the time. But that system itself, had its own challenges. One, you have to transport the cash from the banks to the hospitals. And some of the hospitals were in hard-to-reach areas. So it becomes very difficult for the health workers and also the patients to receive money at the time. And the effect of that was strikes. We experienced a lot of strike, at the time. And so after that, we engaged with the Ministry of Health and other partners for options. And at the time, we realized that there were mobile money operators, 3 of them, and a number of the health workers had accounts with those mobile operators. So what we agreed with the other partners at the time was that we should move the payment from cash to e-money. And in a way, that process, helped a lot. One, the health workers were able to receive their payments on time. Unlike, previously when they had to go to the locations where they were going to be paid, they had to abandon, the patient. They stand in lines for hours, and that's created chaos in the hospitals. So with the mobile money payment, that aspect was addressed. And also the cost element was to a very large extent, reduced. In fact, in the end, government was able to make savings of about $10.8 million through, the use of e-money. And beyond that, we also realized that a good number of, the health workers had bank accounts. So at some point, we also moved to making the payments to their accounts. So that actually, helped to reduce even, the number of deaths and the inconveniences that workers, we are facing at the time. So that was a good experience. Using the system itself was a good experience. We are still working towards improving, our payment system. As we speak, we are on the verge of doing the user acceptance tests for the national switch that is currently, being developed. And hopefully, by the end of the year, the switch will go live. And what that means for us is that the national switch will now allow interoperability, among all the players in the financial sector. One can simply move monies from his or her account, bank account, to mobile wallet, and also use the resources in the mobile wallet to make payments, either through payments to health service providers or other services that individuals, will be benefiting from.
Thank you very much. I'd like to move to Egypt. And you mentioned earlier that in your opening remarks that there's a sort of different way to look at healthcare access because it's a very broad topic. And many times we think of this topic in the context of vulnerable segments, people that have low income or women and children. But you did mention that you could also look at healthcare access from a capital or financing perspective. Can you break that down for us in the context of what's happening in Egypt?
Okay. I think one of the main problems, not only in Egypt, but in all our countries in Africa and some of the Arab countries, emerging market, we discovered during the last few years that we have a very big percentage of immigration from the young doctors. Maybe in the beginning you look for such problems that it's not a major or a big problem, but when you deep dive on it, you will find that after 10 years, you will not find doctors to serve your population, especially that our population in Africa is increasing with ratios out of the whole world. But this was a very big problem, and it was come over the table during the last couple of years, and on the importance of the president himself. And we started an initiative last year, and it's come to the market this year, how to retain our doctors inside our countries. And the central bank had a major role on this initiative, because to retain these doctors, what is the main barriers or obstacles that they are facing? First of all, when they are graduated and working, they start with a very low salaries compared with advanced countries. And this is the main reason that they are leaving their country. To support them with extra salary or extra wages, I think the only solution it was to support them to have their own clinic or their private clinic. But the initiative is to how to give the young doctors or the fresh graduate doctor with a proper loan to build their own or their private clinics, even if it's a joint clinics with 2 or 3 doctors. And the central bank role, it was how to facilitate the policies the procedures, and on the same time to give them the proper loan with the proper pricing, which was challenged. Under the current pricing circumstances and under the current dramatic increase in pricing all over the world, it was a mandate to have a subsidized initiative with a special pricing for this segment and to waive them from a lot of restriction and policies and to have a special program for them. First of all, sales turnover. They are young, but we can't look for the sales turnover. By the way, the young doctor, they are considered as the microfinance because they are still on the beginning and it's the microfinance business. And we treat it like this, and we already issued our initiative with a subsidized interest rate with a very simple and easy process and procedures to retain and to reduce the number of immigrated doctors outside of Egypt. I think this was very important, and it could be a good initiative to be taken with other countries, or we can share our experience on it.
Thank you very much. And I just thought that was good to consider the fact that the topic can be tackled from not just a demand side point of view, but also supply side as well. And for Kenya, you mentioned the Mtiba wallet, which is hugely successful and probably the most researched healthcare model when it comes to DFS in the world. Now, you partnered with Farm Access, a joint venture. From your perspective, what was the impetus or the incentive for M-Pesa to create a joint venture dedicated to health financing? Because how M-Pesa started coming into health is quite almost worlds apart, but there's clearly a link there. But what was the driving force for you to get into that space?
So 3 years ago, or even 5 years ago, our organization, Safaricom PLC, strongly began to work from a vision that talks about transforming lives. So that's our purpose as an organization. We don't just wake up and just focus on the profit, but more importantly, we say, how can we transform lives? The next step we took as an organization was to embrace very strongly the SDGs. So we've actually signed on as an organization. We are very engaged on it, and it was a whole cultural transformation. So everyone did their work and did their work from the perspective of how will this benefit good? How will we do good? How will we really help the society? So SDG 3 talks about access to quality healthcare. So given that larger context, we then, and also the other thing I just want to point out, from an M-Pesa perspective, we have an M-Pesa Foundation. And so one of the things the foundation always was getting was very many requests for health support. So then the question became, how do we create a framework that allows M-Pesa to help as many people as possible in a digital framework that is scalable, sustainable, convenient to access to as many people as possible? So with that thinking, then we then embarked on this framework very willingly because it ticked all the right boxes from our mission, from our vision, and from our desire really to make an impactful benefit on the community. Now, I just want to make one small correction. Because it is a health wallet and it's distinct from the normal M-Pesa wallet, the central bank did need to approve it. Now, why was it being approved? The wallet for health is very different from the normal mobile money wallet. Right. It has no limits. You can get money from other partners. So for example, we have a very large diaspora framework in Kenya. So people can send you money, donors can send money into that wallet. So the fact also, the other interesting element around that wallet, it doesn't expire. So typically, if the funds are held and it is an inactive account, then it expires. So it does not expire. So it has a lot of features that makes the wallet very attractive. The critical thing is that that wallet can only be used for health and nothing else. You can only register once to avoid misuse, abuse, and fraud. But then we are able to use that framework to then create an ecosystem that informs many things. So during and progressively, especially as we went into COVID, then there was added urgency. What was the urgency? Very many people were getting scared of going to a health provider, going into a hospital setting because of all this thing of who am I in contact with, will I get sick? Hospitals themselves were very overwhelmed. So again, during that time, the central bank obviously increased the limits of all wallets, but then also the mainstreaming of MTBA became more apparent. But then there was another group of vulnerable people that had to be now taken care of. And working very closely with the central bank and the government, a number of elderly people now are getting stranded in terms of receiving their pension. So that framework was jointly done to ensure, because the elderly were very vulnerable when it came to COVID, and therefore they had to continue receiving their pensions and make it possible for them just to get on with their lives. But to the question that you've asked, the larger intent is always to transform lives. And because of the way the brand is positioned, many times we are asked, is M-Pesa now a doctor? Is M-Pesa now a farmer? What exactly is M-Pesa? And M-Pesa is a wallet. It's an enabler for good. But we are very open to partnering with public and private sector players to really address what is at the core, or what is very fundamental for the well-being of our people. So health is key. Education is key. And so those are things that we will seriously endeavor to address, because healthy customers are more engaged customers, are more transacting customers. So they do very many things. But if your customers have these vulnerabilities and you choose then to ignore them, then obviously then you can't ignore the consequences of what that will bring.
And I like the fact that the company is, keeping up with the times, because the world is changing and we're seeing a lot of companies dipping their fingers in all sorts of different segments. And I think it was Darwin who said that when it comes to change, it's not the smartest or the fastest of species that survives, but it's the one that's most adaptable to change. And I think it makes perfect sense to serve where you're able to serve. I'd like to touch on data. You mentioned that you have a framework, but you also mentioned that you saw that there were a lot of people asking for health services. And I'll ask this question to yourself as a follow-up, as well as Adrian, the importance of data, how important that was, and how you went about it in producing a product that could adequately serve the most important thing that any person could have, and that's health. So what role did data play in this?
So data is always at the heart of any digital solution. So one of the things you want to ensure with the data is, one, you know your customer. So the whole KYC discussion is very, very pertinent, because the more the completeness of the data, the correctness of the data makes it that you understand the person that is receiving the service. So the KYC process for MTBA is fairly straightforward. You just need to be over 18 years, register with an ID, and that really does capture who you are. So the KYC process there is absolutely critical, because as we begin to understand who you are, there are additional use cases that come through. The other insights from the data is that you can start predicting what will be some of the challenges, the health issues. Remember, now we are living in a world where very quickly people can be very exposed to a health scare. So as you begin to gather that data, it becomes very useful. I'll give you an example. When it came to the vaccination framework, Kenya was very, very keen to ensure people start getting vaccinated. So capturing that information, knowing how to disperse the vaccines across the country, making sure that you target the right population, those decisions made it that very, very quickly, a number of the elderly who are very, very vulnerable were quickly vaccinated. So those are the kind of decisions that, one, enabled us not to go into full lockdown or stay there for very long, because then as you were able to address the challenges around vaccination, then very quickly people start being able to go back to work, being able to get back into their way of being and living. So the data is critical. The data in itself can also be shared. So people say, how do we partner? One of the things we know is that public sector players, policy players, always have access to a lot of data. So what the data then does is that, I've heard people saying we are the network of networks. increasingly data and more data becomes, I won't say the data of data because that won't make sense, but more of a data warehousing. But that data then becomes very, very insightful to help make decisions. So the way the data then is captured, the way it is shared, the way it is used, then helps you provide a better experience from a health perspective for the customer. So when you think of the solution, one of the things that then quickly lands is the speed of trust. The customer data is correct. The value chain, the players who are coming into the ecosystem are being vetted. So you don't want players who can't provide the required level of care. And then as you build on that, what in essence then happens is that the healthcare proactive framework is enhanced and the speed of trust is greatly improved.
Very good. I like the fact that you touched on the behavioral aspects of data, because with your KYC, it doesn't always speak to that person's behavior, but I did pick up elements of behavioral type data, which is very, very good. Adrian, importance of data from your perspective?
Yes, so mine is less of a definitive answer and more of a hypothesis or question. In that one challenge that we have within healthcare is that we don't have enough data at the primary care level, and specifically in communities. So health systems are lacking this community-based primary care data. There's a primary healthcare performance initiative that's trying to capture this data across countries, and it's very difficult. It's going to take a lot longer to roll out national electronic health record systems, especially in communities with private practice GPs in rural areas, than it is to roll out national payment systems or to work with partners who have reached national level penetration. And when you have a company like CarePay with the MTIBA wallet, and in other countries where we're seeing similar initiatives starting to be created, is you have a way to capture billing data. And billing data is rich in being able to talk about the care that people are accessing, what is being provided, looking at products moving through the system. And there's a lot of importance to that, from understanding what the needs are and having that epidemiological data. When I talk to data analysts, they talk about the richness of billing data. We work with one company who does a lot just with billing data, and they said, if we can get our hands on billing data, every time we do that, there's a lot we learn about populations and about what the gaps are in healthcare systems. And again, it's a way to detect outbreaks early on. So I think when we look at data, we have to take a very comprehensive approach to this and say, also, what does that finance data mean for health systems, and what is the value that it can provide for health policy planners as well?
Very interesting. I wouldn't have tied billing data into the conversation, but that's very, very good and interesting. We're going to Sierra Leone. So, Sheikh Yaya, you had the Ebola epidemic, and then COVID hit the world as well. So what lessons were you able to take from, the first wave of Ebola and into COVID?
Yeah, the good thing for us in Sierra Leone was that we already had, the experience of Ebola.
Yeah.
And during that period, there were structures that were put in place. And between 2015 and 2016, the central banks, together with other partners, had made a lot of reforms. Earlier you spoke about, the EKYC. At the time of Ebola, we had EKYC policy that was in place. But in between 2015 to 2020, when we had, the experience of Ebola, the EKYC went through, a lot of updates. We also, introduced the use of agents. We introduced other legislations, such as the national payment system, which I spoke about earlier on. the Deposit Insurance Act, which is currently in Parliament for enactment, and a host of other instruments were introduced in between the two crises. And so you will realize that when we experience, Ebola, in terms of fatality, we had minimal number of deaths occurred, during the period, because the structures that were developed, during Ebola, were reactivated. And that helps a lot to contain the crisis. And again, like I said earlier on, we are able to make, savings of over $10 million due to the fact that when the e-money was introduced, we were able to detect ghost workers, and also because of, common names, you had the issue of double dipping, which during COVID-19, we did not, experience any of that. So the issue of health workers, getting to lines to receive their pay did not occur at this time. Most of the payments, or all of the payments was done through the e-money. So I think, these were experiences that one can share. Again, the figures are there to show that given, the experience that we went through in 2014, 2015, we were able to contain, COVID-19 in record time with a few number of deaths. Thank you.
Excellent. Going to Egypt, Sharif. So there are three key developments that took place in Egypt, or that are still taking place, that I will sort of relay. And you have eFinance, which is a state-owned fintech platform, which listed on the Egyptian Stock Exchange, and they partnered with Egypt's Universal Health Insurance Authority to launch eHealth, a digital health service company. You then have the president, who's also pushing very hard for the speeding up of digital transformation and financial inclusion. You have a new partnership between Tamwili and BIPA SS, which is offering a health information exchange and discounted products. So you have these developments taking place across the health sector and also the technological sector. So the question is, from a regulatory perspective, how are the regulations for financial inclusion influencing private sector and public sector health insurance innovations with that context?
Okay. I think the data, what you mentioned and what my colleagues, they already replied, it's one of the main challenges for the health sector and for provide a proper health for our people. And from here is coming the role or the importance of the banking sector and the financial inclusion. Financial inclusion and banking sector, they have the data. The governmental entities, unfortunately, they don't have the proper data to track and to provide the proper service for the people. And from here, as I said from the beginning, the correlation of or the importance of the financial inclusion and the financial sector. Central banks should facilitate the process. I will give you an example. One of the decision taken for to increase the financial inclusion ratio in Egypt is to provide accounts for individual and for the economical sector with only the ID, without any kind of paper. Once this will happen, and when we are talking about the e-finance project and MISA cards, which will be multiple usage or multiple education, uh, 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 the financial inclusion rates it's increased during the last year with approximately 8%. This is affect the data that we are talking about. And accordingly, when the national health insurance health system will be ready and we will automatically overlap or work on with the cards, we will have the data and they will have the normal data of the employees. And I think whenever the regulator facilitate to onboard the much bigger number of population, this will facilitate the health system and the national health system. One of the major or the important things that the country should do during the next period is partnering between the different governmental entities. I think lack of partnering or talking same language, this is one of the major problems that making what we are faced now. And I'm not talking about Egypt, but I'm talking generally. Ministry of Health, they're working on their way. Central banks, they're working on their way. The Association of Insurance, they're working on their way. MNOs working on their ways. If all parties sat together, put what they have from data, from records, and what they want to need to reach or to go, I think that this is the solution for our, I will not say any more problem, but challenge on the health sector, and it will be solved. Every entity to sit together and to put what they have and to have a main objective or a common objective to reach together. This is the easiest way. It's not politics, but it's how to manage the current situation. MNOs is very important, and I'm very happy that we have the experience of M-Pesa, because MNOs, they are faster and they have the data base and the number of clients that will support a lot and will expedite the process to reach what we want. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. We're running out of time. Do we have time for one or two questions, or is time complete? Because I see... Right, so we'll give one lucky audience member the opportunity to ask a question. We do have a networking session at the gala dinner, so you're more than welcome to engage the speakers at the gala dinner. Anyone in the audience? I saw a hand here. If Gias can just pass the mic on to the center, please. Since it's the only question, please make it a good one.
It's a very short one. Just to commend the panelists, I just wanted to have a better understanding of the M-Pesa reference to limits. And when you spoke about limits or not having limits, my mind went to three issues. Whether or not it's to do with amounts that you transfer from one account to the other, that's a possible limit. Or is it to do with the amounts you deposit in a wallet? Or whether you operate a credit card system kind of wallet where you can actually draw money from a wallet account and eventually pay the operators. So what kind of limits are we talking of here? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. With regard to the limits, I'll start with the last question. It's not a credit card system, so you can't overdraw your account. So that is not within the framework. Secondly, the limits are two. One, there is no limit on the amount in the account itself. And there is no limit on how much can be transferred into the account. Why is the thinking within the context of that wallet there? Because the requirement can be high. You could be hospitalized, you could be going through a very prolonged treatment engagement. So here you're thinking about the customer. What would they really need? Whereas in other instances, the limits can be lower In this particular case, it was a very targeted and agreed effort to make sure that the friction is not there, the amount of money required when the treatment is required is available to make sure that the patient can quickly get treated. What that has done based on the feedback is that people then proactively go to hospital or access care before the issues get out of hand. So that was one of the key considerations. So I hope I've answered your question there.
Thank you very much for that. So that brings us to the end of this panel discussion. Just to wrap up, it's a very complex topic. DFS unto itself is very complex, and I think it's safe to say that healthcare, the topic of healthcare is probably even more complex, so it's definitely not something that we'll be able to unpack in deeply sufficient detail in the space of an hour. But just a few takeaways that I got from the panelists was partnerships and collaborations, just mentioning a few keywords: partnerships, collaborations, demand, both demand and supply, and the fact that we're dealing with people at the end of the day. We are meant to transform lives, even as policymakers. Data seems to be a recurring theme, so that's very important, and that is, as what was said, the heartbeat of any digital solution. It's also important to sell trust and to have a comprehensive approach as well. And lastly, regulatory instruments will help play that enabling role. So at this point, I'd like to give a very much thank you to the panelists for an insightful discussion. So thank you to you as the audience members. Thank you so much for your patience and your time, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask that we give the moderator, Candy Nwa, a big round of applause for moderating this session beautifully. We'll ask the panelists to stay up on stage. We're going to have a group photo taken. Can I ask the Governor Vasconcelos, please, to join us as well for this group photo? And while we're, yes. Also want to remind you all, please don't forget the evaluation for this session. You need to add that, get on the schedule and add it, okay, for this plenary session. We'd love to hear from you. That helps us with our planning and our decisions with regards to the next forum. All right, thank you again. Please don't forget to visit the bazaar as well, ladies and gentlemen. Just one more group shot and we'll excuse the panelists. Don't forget to visit the bazaar and don't forget the dress code for tonight. If you can, we'd appreciate it. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. See you tomorrow.